Welcome to the Exploress. Time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. It's the year 870 in the bustling Norwegian market town of Kaupang. You wander the busy streets, passing blacksmith shops and glass artisans, innkeepers and shipwrights. Sailors unload their goods as merchants barter in dozens of languages. Wealthy patrons, dressed in exotic caftans and embroidered tunics, browse for foreign spices as the chieftain's armed warriors patrol to discourage thieving and ensure trades are fair. You might not get to travel as much as your seafaring husband does, but as a Norse woman, you can buy the world at this market. Wine from Byzantium, silk from China, swords from Frankish Germany, amber from the Baltics, copper from the Arab Caliphate, and even slaves from Ireland. If there's one thing Vikings are known for, it's getting on ships and going a-raiding. But they never would have sailed quite so far if not for their actual sails, which were woven by women. Sailing, raiding, and trading were all a vital part of Norse society, and the ladies had a part to play in it all. Let's head back to the Viking Age once more with authors and Norse experts Eleanor Barraclough and Nancy Marie Brown. Grab your strongest thread and keep your axe handy. Let's go traveling. But before we do, I want to thank a few of our patrons. My newest pirate queen, Wendy. My new lady presidents, Brittany, Frederique, and Emma. My newest boss lady, Louise. My warrior queens, Alexis, Amanda, Kate, Gail, Ika, Jen, Jessie, June, Neve, and Sloan, MCF, and Sarah. My imperial empresses, Alyssa, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Letitia, Sally, Samara, and Teresa. And my lady pharaohs, Bridget, Cheryl, Kot, Kate, Kimberly, Laura, Lori, Sophie, and the delightful Courtneys. I simply couldn't keep the show going without my patrons who get every episode early and ad-free, plus plenty of bonus episodes, full interviews with guests, and more. To find out all about it, just go to my website or visit the link in the show notes. And now a content warning. In talking about enslavement in the Viking Age, we will be telling some stories that talk about sexual assault and violence. So, if that's not for you today, you might want to skip this one. In our last episode, we talked about what your average Viking woman's day looked like, but we left out something pretty vital. Weaving. When we ladies aren't cooking, caring for our children, or working the farm, that is what we're likely spending our time doing. This isn't a fun little hobby or a way to pass the time. Weaving is the lifeblood of our society. Why is weaving so important? Because shopping, in the modern sense, doesn't exist in the Viking Age. That means ready-made textiles are expensive. So most people weave their own fabrics and make their own clothes as well. It's time-consuming, but practical. Going nude in sub-zero weather isn't exactly advisable. And it's absolutely the responsibility of women. Without our labor, the men around us would likely be getting around in there altogether. Eleanor had a lot to say about the vital role women's work played in Viking exploration, and our way of life in general. I want you to imagine her holding up a Lego Viking ship, as she did when I spoke to her, and pointing at all the things that wouldn't be possible without Norse women's work.
So it's like, why is textile making so important? We just have to look at something like this. This is like absolutely, this is a Viking ship with, shields and, nice dragon heads up front. But take away the sail for a start, right? That is something that women, a woman, I mean, there are all sorts of statistics, but, it's like a couple of years labor, full labor. Obviously, they wouldn't be doing it by themselves, most likely. But, collectively, something as important as a sail for crossing the North Atlantic, or wherever they are, well, forget that. That's not a thing that's there anymore. You see this nice little shelter down here. Well, this probably has a sort of textile roof. That's gone. So they've got absolute no protection from the elements. Well, that's okay, because they can't go anywhere because they don't have a sail anymore. They can only get so far with oars. But then we just have to look at what they're wearing. So here we've got this little figure up here. So we need to take away all his clothes. We have to take away all his sort of all his waterproof garments for the journey, so that's going to be gone as well. And I know it's not textiles, but of course, well, they need to eat something, and women are usually responsible for food production and food storage within the home, so well, we can take away that. So he's going to be dead in a couple of days, and then, well, once he's dead and he's died of exposure and the rest of it, well, we're going to need more humans, aren't we? Except there are no more humans because we don't have the wood. So in the end, we've just got a chunk of wood, right? So that's not going to get us to any sort of Viking Age, is it?
Pretty much all Norse women spin, weave, and sew, and we do it a lot. The majority of female Viking graves include textile tools, and the finger bones of many a female skeleton show arthritic damage, suggesting we are weaving a lot of the time. Here's Nancy.
It's one of those jobs that it is extremely easy to do while you are pregnant and nursing a young child. There's not a lot of very important, jobs, in that kind of culture that you can do when you're pregnant. But that's one of them that you can do very, very well. So women did have a lot to do with textile work, and textile work ranges everywhere from making bags to carry the grain in, to, bedding and clothing, to sails.
Our weaving techniques are incredibly advanced for our era and well known throughout the medieval world. The process starts with harvesting flax for linen or shearing sheep for wool. You then have to clean, sort, card, and comb the plants or wool to make the fibers and yarn soft and pliable. Next up, we have to spin it into thread using a spindle whorl and distaff. This is often a task set to small children, or even to men if they have nothing better to do at home. Just as well they're helping out, as spinning takes forever. It might take a good spinster, the name for a female spinner, up to 10 hours to spin the thread that a practiced weaver will use up in just 1 hour. It takes 13 miles of thread all up to make just one set of clothes. Are you tired yet? Once spun, the thread is ready to be warped onto the loom. The warp consists of the threads that run vertically on the loom, forming the base through which the weft, or horizontal running threads, will be woven. This setup process takes about 2 weeks and a great deal of math. You have to judge and cut the current amount of thread for whatever length of cloth you're making, then tie each thread to the rod to make the pattern you're going to weave. We Viking ladies use an upright warp-weighted loom. The threads are tied onto a beam, and weights are tied to the threads at the bottom to keep them under constant tension. Archaeologists have actually found quite a lot of these loom weights, many bearing inscriptions with individual women's names, probably to keep the other ladies from swiping them. After all, they've got to be one of the most important and most frequently used items we Viking ladies own.
So these runic inscriptions written on the weights, I love that. It's just, I just love, even though we don't necessarily know anything more about these people, it's just having these tiny fragments of, it's almost like, I was here, I existed in the world, this was my name.
These looms are big, a bit taller than we are, and they lean up against the wall. We can weave any kind of textile on this bad boy, but wadmal, a wool fabric, and twill are the most common. We Vikings are famous for creating fabrics that are light, stretchy, and glossy, often with fetching patterns of diamonds or rings. If you're dreaming of doing your weaving while sitting down enjoying a cup of mead and maybe a podcast episode, I'm sorry to disappoint you. This is not just a craft, but an exercise. It's going to keep us fit, that's for sure. It's been estimated that one woman weaving alone all day might walk 23 miles, shuttling the weft back and forth across the loom. Now, that's a recipe for some toned calves. No surprise that women often do this in pairs, working together to pass the weft hand to hand. Once the cloth is woven, it might be dyed with natural plant products, and then it can finally be sewn into clothes. Weaving often happens in dedicated huts. These are communal spaces, places where women can talk and commune with each other. It's likely to be one of the most lively spaces in which we ladies spend our time.
And there's a wonderful saga description but basically a feud develops within different factions of the same family. But the start of this feud, in a way, or at least sort of where it ignites, is when a man overhears his wife and his sister-in-law, I think, gossiping, or let's not say gossiping, because that's sort of, they just talking, just having a nice time talking about, who they were involved with before they got married. And of course, he's absolutely horrified by, and it turns out that she was involved with someone who he's got beef with, and so that becomes a thing. But it's really funny because, of course, the saga very much then focuses on the action that develops, post that point. But I just love them sitting there weaving in the room, talking about, that's what I got up to. Yeah, he was great. We have women starting feuds, or sort of making friends, or telling stories, or telling dirty jokes, or talking about love affairs in these female spaces as they're weaving.
They would also be rowdy spaces because there are kids running around up in here. Women, and especially mothers, are forever multitasking.
So there's a Norwegian weaving room where they found little bits of it was sap, essentially, that had little children's teeth marks in that children had been using almost as chewing gum. Or there's a weaving sword made from whalebone from Norse Greenland. So it's to sort of pack down the fibres on the loom, to make the rows tighter. And it looks like some child has taken it and has drawn little figures with shields and swords on it. So you suddenly got the element of play and, quite frankly, irritation. Small children under your feet. What do you do?
But we ladies aren't just making our goods. Sometimes we're also selling them. The Vikings have a metal weight economy, so to buy something, you'll give the merchant some precious metal, and they'll measure it on a set of balance scales. Archaeologists have found many graves containing balance scales, suggesting the people buried within them were merchants or traders. At the market town of Birka, 32% of graves with scales belong to women. So we know that not all Norse women are staying on the farm. At least some of us are living in market towns, making a living trading or selling goods. We're usually weaving specialists, the kind that create luxury fabrics using sophisticated techniques and imported materials like silk. Fancy. If you want high-quality cloth, you'll go to a Norse market town like Birka or Kaupang and visit one of these enterprising women. But a lot of us are busy weaving things for our men. Let's talk about all the items ladies are expected to provide for raiding crews. Viking ships often sail in the icy storms of the North Sea, so high-quality clothing that will keep the crew both warm and dry is essential. We'll make special water-resistant wool hoods, jackets, trousers, hats, socks, and even mittens for the raiders in our family. The men are also equipped with special woolen blankets called batrier, which weigh up to 39 pounds and are basically sheepskin sleeping bags. One textile historian from our era will make her own batrier using traditional Viking techniques, and it will take her about 6 months to get it done. And that's on a modern-day loom, honey. Just supplying blankets for an average Viking crew of about 70 warriors would take some 35 years of work. Another modern textile historian will calculate that it takes, all up, about 17.5 years of work to clothe a full crew. Now that just seems excessive. These raiders aren't only concerned with warmth, though. They also need protection in battle. Only kings wear metal chainmail, as iron is extremely expensive, so most warriors wear body armor made of a type of cloth called linothorax. It's quite simple but clever, made of 30 layers of linen quilted together. It's lightweight, comfortable, and surprisingly effective. It can withstand both arrows and blades. One modern research team will create their own linothorax armor and do a series of weapons tests on them before declaring the stuff comparable to modern-day Kevlar. How many hours did it take them to make one linothorax suit? 715. That is an awful lot of time at the loom. If all our menfolk needed was something to wear on their journeys, that is where our story would end. But they are only able to go out raiding if they have woven sails to take them there. And who's weaving these sails? That's right, the ladies. Viking sails are square, dyed in blue, red, green, or striped, created from woolen twill, and usually greased with tallow, fish oil, or tar to make them less permeable in the wind. These sails are tricky to make. They have to be light enough to raise, but heavy enough to withstand a storm. Thus, Norse women create a very special type of wool, using a specific short-tailed breed of sheep with 2 different coats, an underlayer of soft, fine wool and an outer layer of long, strong hair. They weave the strong hair vertically and the soft wool horizontally to make sails that are perfect for long-distance, open-sea sailing. And you know what? This process takes a shockingly long time. Here's Nancy.
One of my favorite statistics is that there were these 2 women in Copenhagen who, for their PhD projects, made a Viking sail from the wool. And it took them 4 years, and they used over 1 million feet of thread. So they spun 1 million feet of thread and wove it into the sail. And it's just like, oh my God, can you imagine doing that for your PhD?
Archaeologist Morten Raven of Denmark's Viking Ship Museum estimates that spinning and weaving enough cloth for just one sail accounts for about 37% of the total number of hours logged by builders of an average Viking ship. If the crew was carrying spare sailcloth, that means about 53% of the total work on a Viking ship is being done by women. He's also found that a large warship probably requires more than 10,000 hours of labor and 150 sheep just to create one sail, which means 2 years and 9 months' work if you're doing 10-hour days with no days off. No thank you. We ladies are the ones planning, organizing, and working to create what is a pretty essential part of every Viking ship. There are hundreds of these ships, and thousands of warriors though, and as productive as Viking women are, there is no way they can create that much cloth in between all of their other duties. So what is making this level of output possible? Or should we say, who? Archaeologists have found little pit houses clustered together in various Norse settlements. These are weaving workshops, and they would have been filled with the enslaved. Each tiny house is just large enough for a loom and a wooden bench, filled with supplies and tools of the trade. These pit houses aren't nice places. The enslaved are working in near darkness, breathing in tiny floating wool particles as they weave from dawn until dusk. If you pass by these houses, you're going to hear 2 things: working songs and coughing. But we'll return to life for enslaved women in the Viking era later. First, let's find out where these women come from. We Vikings go out on raids for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's to establish trading relationships. Sometimes it's to find slaves or wives. Sometimes it's to plunder enough loot to pay for the next war or to conquer new towns and lands. One thing's for certain, though. They're expensive to mount, and they take a whole lot of resources. We have this notion that Viking raids are the province of men, but recent studies suggest that isn't true. We ladies play a huge role in funding and, as we just found out, equipping these voyages. High-status women arrange banquets and help build alliances between their menfolk, which in turn helps make these joint efforts possible. They also function, as we found out a few episodes back, as advisors to their men, helping to plan these journeys out. But we're not just behind-the-scenes players when it comes to raiding. we have evidence that women sometimes go on these adventures as well. We'll talk about women warriors in our next episode. For now, it's important to know that, yes, we ladies are often going sailing too. No other medieval people travel as far and wide as the Vikings. Our market towns are cultural melting pots, full of people and goods that Norse traders bring back. We journey to more than 36 countries and across at least 8 different seas, establishing vast trade networks from Russia to Byzantium and Afghanistan to China. What does travel for us look like? It isn't just ships. Wagons, wooden carts, horses, and our own 2 feet are all common means of transport, as are sleds pulled by reindeer, ice skates, and skis during the winter months. The Baltic Sea is blocked by sea ice for about 6 months of every year, but we still sail the rivers, fjords, lakes, and coastal channels. We certainly know our way around a boat. By far the most common type of ship is the tiny dugout logboat, hollowed out from a single tree trunk. But during the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking shipmakers diversify into creating all types of specialized ships, including deep-sea cargo haulers, offshore patrol boats, fancy yachts, and warships. It's that last, warships, or longships, that the Vikings are especially well known for, mostly because of how well they terrified their neighbors. It will not come as a surprise to learn that longships require a great deal of labor to make. When a group of historians reconstruct the 11th century Skjoldelev II longship in Denmark using traditional techniques, it takes about 2,650 days to build, along with an extra 13,500 hours of ironwork. These ships feature cutting-edge naval technology, designed to be quick, versatile, and agile. Their long, narrow hulls are light enough to reach speeds of about 15 knots, around 17 miles an hour, and shallow enough to navigate rivers and creeks as well as open ocean. And when people see us coming, they start quaking in their boots. When we Vikings first decide to get very into raiding, our victims aren't surprised to see us coming. They already knew we existed. We'd been trading with them for decades. They were just surprised that people who used to come in peace to trade goods were now raiding their towns out of what seemed like the blue. This change came around the 8th century, when the smaller Viking chieftains and kingdoms grew tired of fighting amongst themselves and began looking for a greater outlet for their violence, as well as some potential economic gain. Our raiding starts picking up steam in the late 700s, rising dramatically in the early 800s, usually in the form of coastal attacks. From about 835 to 895, raiders band together in large fleets and armies to sack inland towns and extort communities, i.e., if you pay us tribute, we won't attack you. Probably. In the 900s, raiders start establishing small kingdoms in the places they attack, like York or Northumbria in England. From 980 to 1066, Viking kings begin leading massive armies to conquer places like England, which does, for a brief time, have a Viking king named Svein Forkbeard. He's succeeded by his son, Canute, who bags himself an English queen. Our raids are quite famously brutal things. We show up, scare our victims into running for cover, usually in a church, at which point we kill any leaders, capture, enslave, and assault the survivors, ransack the town for valuables, then leave as quickly as we came. The Chronicle of Nantes, written by an anonymous eyewitness who survived the 843 attack on Nantes, a large French town, paints a picture for us. They broke down the doors and knocked out the windows and savagely burst into the cathedral. They struck with their swords the unwarlike and unarmed crowd. They raged against Christ's flock with such cruelty that they cut down the whole multitude of priests, clerics, and laity, with their leader inside the church, except for those who they hauled off to their ships as captives. They killed some of the monks outside the church, others inside. Many, however, they killed over the altar itself, in the manner of sacrificial animals. After the attack on Nantes, a common French prayer becomes, "From the wrath of the Northmen, O Lord, deliver us." A lot has been said about these raids and the sorts of tactics the Vikings used, so I'm not going to go on about it. But it's important to note that not all of the women who face the Norse are lost. Some hold out against them. Take, for example, a lady named Athelflaed, an English queen, who sees the Vikings pushing their way into her territory and says, "Not today, Forkbeard." Instead of paying them tribute, she faces them down on the battlefield, more than once, and even wins. I'm about to release a bonus episode about her over on Patreon if you want to hear more. But for now, let's get back to the unfortunates who end up captured by Vikings and sold at market. One of the main drivers for going raiding is to feed the slavery machine. A strong young man or a beautiful woman is worth just as much as a pile of gold.
Vikings raided to gather wealth. So like most warriors of their time, they went to war to make a profit. They traded to turn one kind of wealth into another kind of wealth. So people that they captured could be traded for silver. They were loot. When Vikings went to war, they were looking not only for beautiful women, they were looking for strong young men.
Foreign men are captured and enslaved to act as farmhands, messengers, or laborers, while foreign women are captured and enslaved to act as wives, concubines, and sex slaves, or to perform household duties like weaving. It's a harsh fact that the Viking way of life simply couldn't exist without exploiting the free labor of the people they enslave. In the Viking Age, anybody can become a slave.
It had nothing to do with what you looked like, your skin color, your hair color, your gender, nothing to do with where you were born. You could be rich or poor. Mostly you had to be young and healthy. If you were old, they just killed you or left you. But anybody could suddenly lose their freedom and find their status reduced to the lowest rank.
Which means slavery in the Viking Age is different from slavery in, say, America in the late 1700s. In America, slaves are considered subhuman because of their racial background, while in the Viking Age, they're still mistreated, and they're certainly on the bottom of the social ladder, but at least they're considered human beings.
Slaves were mistreated in many parts of the Viking Age. They were looked down upon, but they were never considered subhuman because you always could be there. You always knew that you could have that bad luck. So slave was a role that a person could fall out into, and if your luck returned, you could climb out of it. And the one way you could climb out of slavery, especially if you were a warrior, was to fight beside your new master. So you would have people who were captured as slaves going back as warriors, into battle on the other side or against different people.
Slaves are slaves simply because of circumstance, and it's always possible for your circumstances to change. Take Queen Astrid of Norway, who the sagas tell us finds herself fleeing after the Vikings kill her husband. Pregnant and hunted, she tries to flee to Russia, but the Norse capture her ship. They sell her infant son for half a goat and a nice cloak, and he spends 6 years as a field laborer before he's recognized as the rightful king Olaf Tryggvason. His mother, meanwhile, is brought to a slave market in Estonia, where she's eventually recognized by a trader. She begs him to buy her and return her to her family, and he agrees. So long as she'll marry him. He brings her back to Norway, and her family consents to the match. Dysfunctional partnership? Maybe. The most famous slave in all the sagas, though, was Melkorka from Ireland. Her story begins with a wealthy Icelander named Huskold, who is perusing the island markets for a slave girl. A merchant takes him to the back of a tent, where 12 women sit, waiting to be bought. Huskold looks them over and decides to buy the pretty girl at the end of the line. He can see plenty of potential there, despite the fact she's wearing rags. The merchant tells him that she's very expensive, 24 ounces of silver, and that she does have a flaw. She doesn't speak. Hoskuld, who has a very outspoken wife and 4 children at home, sees this as a bonus rather than a problem. So he takes Melkorka back to his tent, assaults her, then dresses her in fine clothes, and they set sail. Back home, Hoskuld tells his wife to be nice to his new sex slave, and soon Melkorka gives birth, without uttering a sound, to a son. Hoskuld formally acknowledges the baby as his own, making him free. Once Melkorka is recovered from the ordeal, Hoskuld's wife says that she had better start pulling her weight or she's gonna have to go. His wife is clearly not a Melkorka fan, and honestly, relatable. Hoskuld makes her a household servant, and she still never breathes a word. 2 years later, Hoskuld is out taking a walk when he hears a strange voice coming from near the stream. He wanders over and finds Melkorka there with their young son. Not only is she talking, but she's teaching him Irish. She tells him that her father is the King of Ireland, and that she is a princess, captured by the Vikings when she was just 15. Instead of being sorry, the ratbag who is Hoskuld is very impressed and a little bit smug to find out that his slave is actually a royal. But his wife is less than pleased. She takes her anger out on Melkorka, whipping her upside the head with some stockings. Melkorka, who's pretty fed up with this whole thing, responds by punching her mistress straight in the nose. One kind of wishes these two ladies would have joined together to beat up their husband instead. He gives Melkorka her own little farm where she can raise their son Olaf. When Olaf turns 18, he arranges a better marriage for his mother without Hoskuld's consent, and then sets off to find the King of Ireland, who formally acknowledges Olaf as his grandson. Melkorka's story is popular because even though she was a slave who had everything taken from her, her royal status, her freedom, her bodily autonomy, she was able to keep her identity and thus her honor safe. Her refusal to speak is the only method of resistance open to her, and she takes it. The way we Vikings see it, she deserves all the respect of any warrior, despite the fact that she never picks up a weapon. Melkorka's story is exciting, but sadly, uncommon.
We have a couple of famous stories about beautiful women who are captured as slaves who then end up marrying their captor or somebody who buys them from the slave trader, who then have children who become important people in the society and either raise their mother out of slavery or she is raised out of slavery when her husband sees how great the son turns out to be. But in a way, these are fairy tales. You know, I'm not sure you can say that happened a lot.
Don't get me wrong. Even though Melkorka is revered in the sagas, no one aspires to be her. If you're a village woman who sees a Viking raiding party coming, the only thing you're likely to feel is absolute and justified terror. Like Melkorka, many women are captured or bought solely to act as sex slaves. Even if you aren't, just being enslaved means you're considered fair game for sexual assault. You are your master's property, and he can do whatever he wants with you. This includes getting you pregnant, then refusing to acknowledge his offspring, condemning your child to life as an outcast. Dark enough for you? Just wait, there's more. Female slaves also sometimes serve as human sacrifices during funerals. We'll talk about Viking funerals more in an upcoming bonus episode. And look, it's not a topic for the faint of heart. Archaeologists have found plenty of female skeletons at grave sites that were clearly sacrifices. And our Arabian friend Ibn Fadlan witnessed a gruesome Viking funeral in 922, in which he tells us the female slaves of those who had died were asked to volunteer to die with them. If you're captured and enslaved by the Vikings, you aren't immediately brought to their homeland. You're usually brought to a nearby slave market to be traded by merchants. The Vikings are trafficking humans on a truly massive scale. Just one monastery raid in the 950s results in 3,000 captured slaves. One historian estimates that during the 10th century alone, Viking traders probably sell between 30 and 60,000 people into slavery just in the East, around Byzantium and the Arab Caliphate, based on the sheer volume of coins discovered in certain grave sites. This isn't a flattering fact about the Vikings, to be sure, but it's important to put their slaving ways into context with their time and place.
One of the things that we have to understand when we talk about slavery in the Viking world, though, is that it was not a new concept. There were slaves in Europe long before the Vikings arrived. The wealthy households would use slave labor to do a lot of the work. The Vikings' innovation was that they sold people abroad. They sold people from one country to another. They created this extensive slave trading network.
Viking Dublin is the largest slave market in the British Isles. Shiploads of captives are brought there and kept in massive warehouses, which archaeologists first believed were used to store livestock. Slavery isn't a new concept in Ireland when the Vikings settle there in 841. Before they arrive, the Irish use the price of one enslaved girl as a standard unit of value. Cute! One young slave girl is worth about 9 cows or 3 ounces of silver. The farther away from home you're sold, the more expensive you become, as you're less likely to try to escape. Thus, the Vikings sell girls on the Volga River in Russia for about 10 ounces of silver, and they can sell the same girls in Baghdad for 500. It's a pretty depressing fact about Viking culture and history in general. Slavery is everywhere. All we can hope for that, for at least some of the women caught up in it, they saw their fortunes change for the better. That's all for now. Join us for the final episode in this series, where we'll meet some fierce warrior women and their mythical counterparts, the Valkyries, and learn more about religion, magic, and the sorceresses of the Viking Age. Until next time. Thanks for listening. If you like the Exploress, tell a friend about it, leave a review and rating wherever you're listening, or shoot me an email and say hi. I love hearing from you. Thanks to Carly Quinn for all her help researching and writing this series. Thanks also to Joshua Stackhouse for my theme music and Paul Gablonsky, aka Mr. Exploress, for my logo.